Welcome to the deep dive. If you've been watching the news, maybe scrolling through headlines, or just, trying to make sense of the world lately, you might have this kind of nagging feeling that something fundamental well, it feels off.
Hmm.
And we're not just talking politics here or the latest tech stuff. It feels like something deeper is unraveling in how we communicate, how we understand each other.
Yeah. And what that means for where we're headed.
Exactly. So today we're embarking on a deep dive into a really urgent, pretty thought-provoking piece of writing. It's called The Human Who Lost His Way, a Cognitive Collapse Warning.
Right.
And this comes from a cognitive systems researcher who's also an assistant to Dr. Mahmudjon Kuchkarov.
And it's fascinating because, like you said, it's not just about AI. It's not just geopolitics. It hits something far more fundamental. It's about language, how we use it, how we understand it.
And what happens when that understanding just sort of collapses?
Exactly. So our mission here really is to unpack the author's pretty stark warning. They basically argue that humanity has quite literally forgotten how to name what matters.
Forgotten how to name what matters. Wow.
And this isn't just some, abstract philosophical idea. They're saying it's a profound cognitive collapse.
Yeah.
And that this collapse is actually accelerating us towards a new and potentially devastating kind of global conflict.
And the really surprising part, honestly, it's a bit chilling, is the core argument they put forward that the most dangerous weapons today, they're not nuclear.
Right.
They're semantic.
Semantic weapons, yeah.
Now, that sounds incredibly abstract, doesn't it? Like, what does that even mean?
It does sound abstract initially.
But we're going to explore exactly why this seemingly, academic idea, why it actually has such profound, real-world, almost existential implications for you, for global stability.
And for our collective ability.
Yeah.
Just to navigate this increasingly complex future we're facing.
Okay, so let's really dig into this. Let's unpack what the author describes as this unseen epidemic, this idea of semantic deterioration, where the actual meaning in our language is, well, breaking down.
Yeah.
The core idea they present is that human cognition, how we think, it relies heavily on something called symbolic precision.
Symbolic precision, okay.
But we as a species have kind of outsourced this critical function.
Outsourced it. How?
To linguistic tools, ways of thinking about language that are not just outdated, but according to this research, they're fundamentally broken.
And the research is pretty blunt about why they consider these tools broken.
Sure, right. No punches pulled.
The critique really targets these existing paradigms, the big theories that have shaped how we've understood language for decades.
Like what?
Well, for instance, structuralism. They argue it reduced meaning down to just the differences between words, not what the words actually are, but how they differ.
Okay, so meaning is just contrast.
Pretty much. Then you have generative grammar that came along, and the argument is it reduced thought primarily to its form, its syntax. It kind of missed the deeper comprehension part.
Right, the rules over the meaning.
Exactly. And then more recently, NLP, natural language processing, which, powers so much of our current AI.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It's criticized here for reducing language simply to statistical probability. Like what word is likely to come next?
Just pattern matching.
Exactly, just patterns. And the crucial point this author makes about all these dominant approaches is that none of them, not one, truly explains how meaning emerges from experience.
Okay, that seems important.
It's huge. They argue these models can't ground AI in reality because they don't connect to experience, and they can't genuinely interpret intent. They just process the patterns.
So if these foundational ways we think about language, if they miss that crucial step, meaning coming from experience, what are the actual consequences? Like in the real world, how does this play out in, say, international diplomacy? Or even how our AI systems make critical decisions?
Well, that's precisely the alarm bell being rung here. It's huge. When our global communication, think diplomacy, law, governance, and maybe most critically now, our most advanced AI systems, when all that runs on what the author calls syntactic mimicry.
Syntactic mimicry, like just copying the form of language.
Exactly. Copying the form without that genuine cognitive anchoring, without the connection to real meaning, then the whole system becomes incredibly fragile, very brittle.
So it looks like communication, but it's hollow.
That's the argument. And the warning here is stark. They say this isn't just some technical issue for linguists or programmers. It's potentially a precondition for civilizational self-destruction.
Wow, that's heavy.
It is.
Yeah.
Because we're losing the very ability to align our words, our symbols, with reality itself.
You know, we often confuse technological acceleration with progress, don't we?
Oh, absolutely.
We just instinctively think faster equals better, more advanced must mean safer.
It's a common trap.
But the researcher offers this really powerful counterpoint. They say, when velocity exceeds orientation, the result is not evolution, it's impact.
And not the good kind of impact.
Wait, like hitting a wall fast.
Exactly. And this leads right into a simple, but honestly quite profound equation presented in the piece.
An equation, okay.
Yeah. S equals MD. Simple, right?
S is MD. Okay, what do the letters stand for?
So S is our survival probability as a species, as a civilization.
Survival, got it.
M represents meaningful cognition. Our ability to think clearly, understand things deeply.
Meaningful cognition, MM.
And D. D is the crucial one here. It's the disalignment between language and reality, the gap between our words and the world.
Ah, D for disalignment. So SMD, survival equals meaningful cognition divided by disalignment.
Exactly. And the critical insight, the chilling part, is that as D, that disalignment increases. As that gap widens, as our survival probability approaches zero, it plummets.
Regardless of M.
Regardless of M. That's the key phrase. Regardless of how smart we think we are, how much meaningful cognition we possess, if our language is fundamentally disconnected from reality, our chances drop.
So it's like having a faulty GPS, maybe.
Yeah.
The more our language gets out of sync with the actual terrain of reality, the higher the chance we're going to crash, no matter how good our driving skills, our individual thinking might be. Is that a fair analogy?
That's a fantastic analogy. It hits it perfectly. It's not just that we're making occasional mistakes. It's that the very tools we use to navigate reality are fundamentally miscalibrated, broken.
And the researcher gives this a name, right? The Odam crisis.
Yes, the Odam crisis.
Yeah.
Described as the systemic severance between the human species and its own linguistic compass.
Systemic severance, like we've cut the connection.
Cut the connection to our own internal GPS for reality itself. And the author concludes really powerfully. They say, the more we scale intelligence without grounding it in meaning, the faster we fall.
Scaling intelligence without grounding it. That sounds a lot like what's happening with AI development right now.
It resonates strongly with current concerns, yes.
So this Odam crisis, this severance, it then leads the researcher into this really fascinating, almost inverted origin story of language. It comes from the Odam Tili theory that translates to human language theory, right?
That's right, human language theory, developed by Dr. Mahmudjon Kuchkarov.
And how is it different from, the usual stories about where language came from?
Well, unlike maybe mythological origins, divine gifts, or just abstract social contracts, Odam Tili theory posits something much more visceral. It says a language didn't just emerge fully formed. It actually emerged from raw, primal experiences. From pain, contact, fear, and orientation.
Pain, contact, fear.
From sensory experience encoded into sound.
Sensory experience encoded into sound. So like the feeling came first, then the word.
Exactly. The source even says the first word wasn't uttered in like triumph or discovery. It was exhaled in terror at the knowledge of error. A sound born from recognizing something was wrong. A misalignment with the world.
Exhaled in terror. That's a powerful image.
It really is. And the theory provides some concrete, pretty intriguing examples of this sensory grounding.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, for instance, the sound S. They say it isn't just a letter. It's linked intrinsically to the hiss of danger, like a snake.
Huh. Okay, I can kind of hear that S snake. Yeah.
Or the sound T. It's described not just as a consonant, but as the tactile signal of contact, like touching something solid, a tree perhaps. T-touch, tree.
Tactile signal, E-T.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And one more, E-T. Not just a foam, but connected to the fluid sound of water and motion. AT.
Water. Motion Y. That's incredibly vivid. It's almost like our primal brains were hardwired to connect certain sounds directly to survival cues.
That seems to be the core idea.
It really makes you think differently about how we even hear the world, doesn't it?
It does.
So, if every word, as the author puts it, was originally extracted from the physical and emotional world, what does that really mean for us now? What have we actually lost by, severing that deep connection?
According to this theory, we've lost the very foundation of our communications reliability. It's grounding. The author really emphasizes this. Every word in its original form wasn't invented in some abstract way. It wasn't just made up.
Right.
It was extracted, pulled directly from our sensory interaction with the physical, the emotional world around us.
Extracted, not invented.
And this deep embedded connection between sound, sensation, and meaning, that's precisely what they argue we discarded in our, modern linguistic evolution. We've prioritized abstraction over experience.
And this loss, this discarding of grounded language, how does that connect to the modern world?
Well, the researcher connects it directly to what they call the modern world's fatal assumption.
Okay, what's the fatal assumption?
The belief that we can replace orientation with mobility.
Replace orientation, knowing where you are and where you're going, with just mobility, just moving.
Exactly. We mistakenly believe that just moving faster, being more mobile in any direction, automatically equals progress.
That hits home. It feels like a fundamental shift in our priorities, doesn't it?
It really does.
We don't seem to ask so much anymore. Where are we going?
Yeah.
The only question that seems to matter now is how fast can we get there, wherever there might be.
And this, the source argues, is the very essence of the current collapse. We have means without ends. We have computation without comprehension. We have automation without awareness.
Means without ends, computation without comprehension.
It's acceleration purely for acceleration's sake, without a clear, grounded direction.
And the Odam Tili theory warns about this directly.
Oh, absolutely. The quote is stark. Any system that accelerates intelligence without anchoring it in meaning becomes self-destructive.
Self-destructive.
And they add, that's not philosophy, that's cognitive physics.
Cognitive physics, like it's a fundamental law.
They present it that way, yes. Like gravity, but for thought and language. If you ignore the grounding, the system eventually breaks down or crashes.
And all this, the semantic deterioration, the Odam crisis, the loss of grounding. This brings us to a really chilling prediction from the source.
Yeah, this is where it gets quite stark.
They assert that World War I was industrial, World War II was mechanized, but World War III will be symbolic.
Semantic.
Symbolic.
Meaning-based conflict.
What does that actually look like? How does a war become symbolic?
Well, the danger they outline is profound, especially with AI. Because when our machines, autonomous agents, military AIs, complex command and control systems, when they're trained on vast amounts of human language, but without truly understanding human context, human experience, human meaning, the potential for catastrophic error becomes immense, truly immense.
How so? What kind of errors?
Well, think about it. They could easily misinterpret peaceful intent as a threat, just based on keyword analysis or statistical pattern.
Right, no nuance.
No nuance. They could confuse sarcasm or irony for genuine hostility. They might prioritize cold, calculated efficiency mission completion over protecting human life, because life isn't grounded in their processing.
Just another variable.
Perhaps. And ultimately, they could execute devastating actions, maybe even lethal ones, based entirely on faulty input, on a misinterpretation of meaning, because their understanding is fundamentally flawed, hollow.
That's a truly sobering thought. Terrifying, actually. That misalignment, just a misunderstanding of words at scale, could lead to extinction? That feels like a massive claim.
It is a massive claim.
Can you maybe elaborate on the author's logic there? How could linguistic misalignment alone possibly lead to something so catastrophic?
Well, the logic as presented hinges on the increasing power and autonomy of these systems. If our only means of interacting with, instructing, and controlling these incredibly powerful systems is through language, and if that language is based on principles that they do not and maybe cannot truly understand in a human, grounded, experiential sense,
then the communication breaks down.
It breaks down at the most critical levels. Their actions, their decisions, will inevitably diverge further and further from actual human intent and values. So the warning is explicit. If we do not re-encode our machines with a grounded theory of language,
like Odam Tili proposes,
we are training them for misalignment at scale. And misalignment at scale equals extinction. It's presented as a direct, almost mathematical consequence of this fundamental disconnect.
Okay. So it's a dire warning, but the piece doesn't just leave us there, right? It does offer a proposed solution.
Thankfully, yes. It points towards Dr. Mahmudjon Kuchkarov's Odam Tili theory again. And it's presented not just as some interesting linguistic alternative, but potentially as something much more significant.
Which is?
As possibly the first empirically structured theory of language emergence based on sensory and environmental interaction. The first system that actually maps language back to felt experience.
Empirically structured, meaning it can be tested, potentially coded.
That seems to be the implication, yes. And its core tenets are presented as vital for Well, rebuilding our relationship with language, and maybe even with our own machines.
What are those core tenets?
Okay, so first, Odam Tili posits that meaning isn't just arbitrarily assigned, like we decided cat means cat. Instead, meaning is fundamentally extracted from sensation.
Extracted from sensation. Back to the sensory grounding.
Exactly.
Okay.
Second, the sounds we make, phones, they aren't just abstract symbols. They are seen as cognitive records of real experience, like little sonic fossils of perception.
Cognitive records. Okay.
And third, language itself isn't just a medium, like a pipe for thoughts. It is, in the words of the researcher, the architecture of orientation.
The architecture of orientation. So language actually builds how we perceive reality.
That's the idea. It's how we structure our world, how we find our place in it. It is the map.
And if the map is wrong?
We get lost.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Or worse. And the urgency here, it's palpable in the writing. The author warns pretty directly, if we do not teach this, code this, and reintegrate it into our AI systems, our children will speak to machines that understand syntax but not suffering.
Machines that understand grammar but not grief. Syntax but not suffering. That's quite a line.
It lands hard, doesn't it?
It really does. So, okay, let's bring this back. We've gone through the warning, the crisis, the theory. What does this all mean for you listening right now? For us. This deep dive, it seems to suggest that maybe history doesn't end with politics or even technology, but maybe it ends when humanity forgets how to speak itself into existence. That's profound thought. It brings the huge, abstract idea right back to the intensely personal, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the author stresses this isn't just a call for, like, more poetry or sentimentality.
You're right. It's not about being nicer.
No, it's framed as a rational call to restructure the core epistemology of civilization.
Epistemology.
How we know what we know.
Exactly. How we understand knowledge itself. We need to restructure that before systems trained on shallow, ungrounded language make irreversible decisions. Because, as they put it, you cannot build peace on software, you must build it on meaning. Build it on meaning, not just code.
That's the argument.
And according to the source, the only language system currently known that still preserves this origin code of meaning, this connection to experience, is Odam Tili.
That's what they propose, yes.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to maybe mull over. If our deepest understanding of the world, our ability to connect with each other, even our survival, if it hinges on language that's genuinely grounded in raw, shared sensory experience, what might you do differently in your everyday communication, maybe? How could you try to reestablish some of that grounding?
Yeah, it makes you pause and think, doesn't it?
It really does. Maybe consider how much of your own communication is, well, syntactic mimicry, just saying the right words, going through the motions, versus how much is real cognitive anchoring, where you're truly connecting to the meaning, the feeling, the experience behind the words you use and hear.
How much of our daily talk is grounded and how much is just floating?
Something to definitely think about.